Ryan and Liam Cullen were twins bound by blood, ambition, and a dangerous hunger for power. But what began as a $300,000 drug empire in Manchester would spiral into a nightmare of betrayal, brutality, and a Dubai torture cell that would erase everything they once controlled. Ryan and Liam Cullen grew up in Manchester, identical twins with the same sharp features and restless energy that made them hard to tell apart. From the outside, they looked like ordinary lads from a working-class estate. They went to the same schools, wore the same football shirts, and spent weekends hanging out with friends. But underneath, there was a hunger for more. The twins never wanted to live the same life their parents had, paycheck to paycheck, watching every penny. They wanted money, status, and power, and they were willing to take risks to get it. At first, the Cullen brothers dabbled in petty crime, small-time shoplifting, and selling knockoff goods. But when they discovered how much money could be made from drugs, their ambitions sharpened. Liam was the talker, smooth with people, and quick to build connections. Ryan was colder, more calculating, the one who handled logistics and made sure things ran smoothly. Together, they were a perfect team. They started small, buying ecstasy pills from a local supplier, and selling them outside nightclubs. The profits came fast, and it was more than they had ever imagined making in a single weekend. As their reputation grew, so did their network. The twins recruited friends from school to act as runners, giving them small cuts of the profit while they kept the lion's share. Within a year, their operation had expanded beyond local pubs and clubs into student parties, festivals, and even small-scale deliveries for private clients. They were careful at first, keeping a low profile, but the money was intoxicating. Before long, they were pulling in thousands every week, stacking cash in shoeboxes under their beds. What began as pocket money had grown into an empire worth hundreds of thousands. The Cullen twins enjoyed the rewards of their new life. They drove flashy cars, not outright purchases but expensive leases designed to show off wealth without attracting too much suspicion. Designer clothes, gold watches, and weekend getaways to European hotspots became normal. For two young men in their early 20s, life felt untouchable. Friends and strangers alike looked up to them, envious of their lifestyle. The twins played into the image, posing as self-made businessmen, though everyone who knew them suspected the truth. But what set the Cullen brothers apart was not just their hunger for money, but their discipline. Unlike many small-time dealers, they treated their drug operation like a business. Ryan tracked profits with precision, ensuring no product went missing and no one skimmed from the top. Liam focused on expanding connections, striking deals with other crews, and keeping relationships smooth. Together, they built a reputation for reliability. If someone bought from the Cullens, they knew the product would be good and the delivery on time. In the world of drugs, that consistency was rare, and it made them valuable. Within 3 years, their small operation had become a criminal enterprise worth nearly £300,000. They had gone from street dealers to respected figures in Manchester's underworld. But success comes with a price, and the Cullen brothers had no idea just how dangerous their climb would become. The Cullen brothers were never satisfied with staying local. Manchester gave them their first taste of power, but their ambitions stretched far beyond crowded clubs and late-night student parties. Liam, always the more outgoing of the two, started making connections with men who had links to Spain's Costa del Sol. Known as the Costa del Crime, it was the playground of exiled gangsters and drug barons. A place where money flowed as freely as the alcohol. For the twins, it represented opportunity. Through a middleman, they secured a direct line to traffickers who could supply them with higher volumes of cocaine at prices that guaranteed profit. This was no longer about quick cash. It was about building a pipeline that could make them rich beyond their wildest dreams. Once the first shipments arrived, their world changed. No longer relying on scraps from small-time suppliers, the Cullen brothers were dealing in kilos, and the profits multiplied almost overnight. Their reputation spread across Manchester and into neighboring cities. They were no longer just another pair of young dealers. They were becoming known as serious players. The brothers thrived on the respect they received. Ryan, who had once been meticulous about hiding his wealth, began to indulge in the luxuries he used to avoid. Custom license plates, tailored suits and VIP tables became a regular part of their lives. Liam, the social one, made sure everyone noticed. But their rapid growth didn't go unnoticed. Rivals who had controlled the scene for years began to see the Cullens as a threat. Street dealers, who had once dominated, suddenly found themselves pushed aside as the twins undercut prices and offered better quality. Whispers started spreading about how fast they had risen, and whether they could really be trusted. Some said the twins had police protection, others thought they had inherited secret money from a hidden investor. Whatever the rumors, one thing was clear: the Cullen brothers were making enemies. Despite the danger, expansion became an obsession. They wanted more markets, more customers, more dominance. Liam courted connections in Liverpool and Leeds, while Ryan began using encrypted phones to secure deals with international traffickers. They even experimented with moving drugs through delivery companies, using fake businesses as fronts. The sophistication of their methods made them appear untouchable. But as the business grew, so did the risks. More people were involved, more money was changing hands, and more attention was being drawn to their operation. Their network of runners was stretched thin, with some beginning to take liberties and skim from deliveries. This was the first real sign of strain. Ryan cracked down hard, firing anyone who stepped out of line, sometimes using intimidation to keep people loyal. But cracks were appearing, and the more they grew, the more fragile their empire became. Still, in those moments, the twins felt invincible. The £300,000 empire they had built was only the beginning. Dubai holidays, Marbella beach parties, and whispered deals in backrooms of luxury villas made them believe they had reached another level. Yet beneath the glamour, danger was closing in. Rivals were circling, police were watching, and the very expansion that had made them powerful was laying the groundwork for their downfall. With money pouring in and their reputation climbing, the Cullen brothers began to believe they were unstoppable. What had started as a cautious operation was now running at full speed, and the discipline that once set them apart began to crack. Ryan, the colder of the two, had always been careful about avoiding attention, but even he started showing signs of arrogance. The brothers flaunted their wealth on social media, posting images of champagne bottles, luxury cars, and penthouse views. For them it was about proving to the world that they had made it. But those posts didn't just attract admiration, they caught the eyes of both police and rivals who had been waiting for the right moment to strike. The police began to build their case quietly, using surveillance, wiretaps, and information from informants. Investigators tracked the Cullen brothers' movements, every flashy night out, every flight abroad, every new purchase added to the suspicion. To law enforcement, the twins weren't just cocky young men. They were dangerous criminals moving huge amounts of drugs through the city. But while the police gathered evidence in the shadows, their rivals were far less patient. One night, outside a busy Manchester nightclub, Liam was caught off guard. Masked men ambushed him in the car park, armed with knives and bats. By the time it was over, he was left bleeding, his body battered and bruised, barely conscious. The attack was not random. It was a message. Rivals were no longer content to watch the Cullen brothers expand unchecked. They wanted to remind the twins that power came with consequences. Ryan was furious. To him, the attack was a direct insult, a challenge to their authority. He made it clear through whispered threats and sudden disappearances of small-time dealers that no one could cross the Cullens without paying the price. But instead of strengthening their control, the retaliation only fueled the cycle of violence. The streets grew tense, with rumors of revenge shootings and violent debt collections. What had once been a smooth, business-like operation was turning into a dangerous feud. At the same time, the brothers' growing carelessness left them exposed. Liam's recovery from the attack was slow, and his frustration boiled over. He began spending recklessly, throwing parties and drawing even more attention. Ryan tried to tighten the reins, but even he couldn't resist the temptations of wealth. The more they tried to show off, the more vulnerable they became. Their runners whispered about police surveillance, and some even considered switching sides to save themselves. Trust was beginning to erode inside the very network they had built. The cracks in the empire were now visible to everyone but the brothers themselves. They believed their names carried too much weight to be challenged, that their money could shield them from real consequences. But the truth was different. Rivals were growing bolder, police were closing in, and their own arrogance was pulling them into a storm they couldn't control. The Cullen brothers had climbed high, but they were standing on shaky ground, and the fall was about to begin. By the time the Cullen brothers decided to leave the UK, the walls were closing in. Manchester had become too dangerous, the streets too familiar, and the police too persistent. Dubai offered a fresh start, a place where money moved freely and the law was less intrusive. On the surface, it was a paradise, glittering skyscrapers, luxury resorts, and a lifestyle that matched the brothers' ambitions. For Ryan and Liam, Dubai represented opportunity, a chance to reinvent themselves as international players and leave their past troubles behind. They arrived with a plan. Ryan intended to set up legitimate fronts for laundering their wealth, while Liam focused on expanding their connections with other expats and traders. Initially, everything seemed perfect. The brothers mingled in exclusive clubs and lounges, forging relationships with wealthy entrepreneurs and business people. They leased high-end apartments and rented exotic cars, creating the illusion of legitimate success. In a city built on appearances, they blended in seamlessly. At first, Dubai was liberating. The brothers felt untouchable, removed from the constant scrutiny of the UK police and the lurking threat of rival gangs. They opened shell companies, invested in cryptocurrency, and even dabbled in luxury property deals. Ryan's careful planning and Liam's charm made them appear as legitimate businessmen, admired by those around them. They hosted lavish parties, confident in their ability to navigate a new world of wealth and influence. But the twins quickly learned that Dubai operated on rules far harsher than they had expected. The glittering facade masked a world of hidden dangers, where alliances were fragile and betrayal was common. Their partners were not interested in friendship or loyalty, they were focused on power and profit. One missed payment or misstep could mean imprisonment, or worse. While the brothers were used to calculating risks in Manchester, the stakes in Dubai were exponentially higher. Money, which had once flowed effortlessly, began to drain away. The legal hurdles of property deals, the fees for maintaining extravagant lifestyles, and the costly mistakes in cryptocurrency trading slowly eroded their fortune. For the first time, the brothers realized that wealth alone could not protect them. Their empire, which had seemed so solid in Manchester, was vulnerable in an unfamiliar environment where rules were unspoken and punishments were severe. Despite the growing pressure, the Cullen brothers refused to return to obscurity. They sought bigger deals, more daring ventures, and riskier opportunities. Dubai offered the perfect stage for such ambitions. A place where ambition could be rewarded almost immediately, but failure could be fatal. The twins were riding a thin line between reinvention and ruin, blinded by the illusion of safety and the desire to reclaim the empire they had left behind. As they navigated this new city, the shadows of their past loomed closer than ever. UK authorities were still investigating them, and former rivals whispered that the brothers were exposed and vulnerable. In Dubai, every deal, every handshake, every transaction carried a hidden risk. The Cullen brothers were beginning to understand that escape did not mean freedom, and that in a city built on power and secrecy, even the cleverest dealers could become prey. Desperation and ambition became the driving forces for the Cullen brothers in Dubai. Their initial success had given them a taste of wealth, but the constant drain on their resources left them restless. Ryan and Liam knew that staying small would only prolong their financial struggles, and they were unwilling to settle for anything less than the vast fortunes they had imagined. It was then that a new opportunity presented itself. A partnership with a shadowy Eastern European cartel that operated in the underworld of Dubai. The offer seemed almost too good to be true. Large shipments of cocaine, guaranteed profits, and the promise of protection in a city where rules were often unwritten. The brothers approached the deal cautiously at first, aware that in the world of international crime, mistakes could be deadly. But the allure of quick, massive gains was impossible to resist. Liam, ever the charmer, negotiated terms with the cartel's representatives, projecting confidence and capability. Ryan, the planner, analyzed routes, contacts and logistics to minimize risk. For weeks, they meticulously prepared, mapping out every detail to ensure their first shipment would be flawless. The operation was ambitious, but for two men who had risen so quickly in Manchester, it felt like the next logical step in their climb to power. The first shipment arrived without incident, and the twins were ecstatic. The cartel had delivered on its promise, and the money flowed back to the brothers in quantities they had only dreamed of before. It seemed like a new era had begun, one where they could reclaim the power they had once wielded in Manchester. Now, on an international scale, the success fueled their confidence. They began making plans for even larger shipments, imagining themselves as global players in a criminal empire that stretched from Europe to the Middle East. But the Cullen brothers were stepping into a world far more ruthless than anything they had encountered before. The cartel operated without tolerance for error, and loyalty was enforced through fear. What the twins perceived as a lucrative opportunity was, in reality, a test of survival. Mistakes that might have been forgiven back home in Manchester could cost them their lives in Dubai. Yet, blinded by ambition and emboldened by their early success, they failed to fully grasp the dangers lurking behind the polished facade of their new partners. As the second shipment approached, the twins' overconfidence began to show. Driven by greed, they skimmed a portion of the profits, convinced they could outsmart the cartel. It was a small fraction, but in the eyes of their new partners, it was an unforgivable betrayal. The brothers, who had once navigated the streets of Manchester with cunning and precision, were now entangled in a network where even minor deception was met with ruthless consequence. Every move, every contact, every decision was being watched, and the sense of security they had felt in Dubai was beginning to crumble. Unaware of the full extent of the cartel's surveillance, Ryan and Liam continued planning bigger deals, thinking they were still in control. But with every action, they edged closer to a trap that had been set long before they even arrived. The world they had stepped into demanded obedience, and the Cullen brothers were about to learn that in the shadowy corridors of international crime, ambition could quickly turn into a death sentence. The Cullen brothers' overconfidence would soon prove fatal. After successfully moving their first shipment with the Eastern European cartel, they believed they had earned a place of trust. The money had flowed, the connections seemed solid, and Dubai felt like a stage where they could rewrite their destiny. But the cartel operated on rules the twins could neither bend nor ignore. Every action was monitored, every transaction scrutinized. The brothers' greed had blindsided them to one crucial truth: betrayal in this world was never forgiven. When the second shipment arrived, the twins made the critical error that would seal their fate. Thinking themselves clever, they skimmed a portion of the profits, diverting cash into offshore accounts they believed were untraceable. Liam handled the maneuver, assuring himself that the cartel would never detect such a small discrepancy. Ryan, preoccupied with logistics and expansion plans, didn't question it. It seemed a harmless, calculated risk, one they thought would go unnoticed. In their minds, they were still in control, still the hunters rather than the hunted. But the cartel's surveillance was relentless. Cameras, informants, and encrypted phone monitoring quickly exposed the skimmed funds. Every message, every transfer, every subtle attempt at deception was recorded. Within days, the brothers' carefully constructed illusion of dominance crumbled. Contacts who had once praised them for their reliability now whispered warnings. The Cullens were no longer partners, they were liabilities. The atmosphere of Dubai that had once felt luxurious and liberating suddenly became claustrophobic and hostile. The twins were under constant observation, their every move anticipated, their escape routes carefully controlled by unseen eyes. Panic began to set in. Liam, who had always relied on charm and negotiation, found himself cornered. He realized that the cartel did not operate on reason, only on power and fear. Ryan, The planner frantically tried to calculate a way out, but every route, every back door was blocked. They had entered a world where mistakes were not merely punished, they were erased. Their prior experience in Manchester, where cunning and intimidation had kept them safe, meant nothing here. The same tricks that had allowed them to dominate the UK streets were useless against a network built on brutality and precision. The cartel moved swiftly. Trusted contacts disappeared, and the twins received indirect warnings of what awaited them if they did not return the stolen funds. Fear replaced confidence, and desperation replaced strategy. Each day brought new threats, subtle at first, then increasingly overt. Vehicles followed them, messages hinted at consequences, and intermediaries made it clear the Cullens' lives were no longer their own. The empire they had built in Manchester, the wealth they had carried into Dubai, and the illusion of control they had clung to, all of it was crumbling in real time. By the time they realized the full extent of their predicament, it was too late. The cartel had made its decision. Ryan and Liam were no longer partners, negotiators, or respected dealers. They were marked men. Every plan, every connection, every ounce of confidence had been stripped away, leaving only the raw reality of retribution. The twins were trapped in a world where ambition had collided with ruthlessness, and survival depended on forces far beyond their control. In trying to cheat the system, they had triggered a chain of events that would lead to unimaginable consequences. A lesson that ambition unchecked by caution could carry a deadly price. The trap set by the cartel closed in quickly. One evening, the Cullen brothers were summoned to what they believed was a routine meeting to discuss their next shipment. Confident in their ability to negotiate and bluff their way out of trouble, they arrived without backup, unaware that the situation was anything but ordinary. The moment they entered the villa, the illusion of control evaporated. They were met not by partners but by enforcers, men whose faces were obscured, whose intentions were clear, and whose patience had long since run out. The twins were quickly subdued and blindfolded, stripped of any sense of power they had ever possessed. They were led into a soundproofed basement, a room designed not for comfort, but for pain. The air was thick and stifling, carrying the faint metallic scent of chains and rusted tools. It was clear that the cartel had anticipated every possible reaction, every attempt at resistance. The brothers, who had once felt untouchable on Manchester's streets and even in the glittering luxury of Dubai, were now completely vulnerable. What followed was a calculated campaign of torture. The enforcers worked with methodical precision, using fear and pain to break the twins both physically and mentally. Beatings were constant, leaving bruises that would have covered their bodies. Their food and water were restricted, and sleep became a fleeting memory. The cartel demanded repayment of the money they had skimmed, but the brothers had already lost it in failed cryptocurrency trades and poorly calculated deals. Every explanation, every plea was met with more brutality. Their empire, which had once brought them fame and influence, now felt like a cruel joke, a distant memory overshadowed by the reality of captivity. Isolation was another weapon. Ryan and Liam were kept separate for long periods, unable to communicate or even see each other. The psychological toll of solitude, combined with the physical torment, began to erode their resolve. Every hour stretched endlessly, every sound amplified by the oppressive silence of the cell. The twins, once so confident, began to understand the depth of the world they had entered, a world in which a single misstep could lead to the end of everything. Despite the brutality, the brothers fought to maintain some semblance of hope. Ryan meticulously observed their captors, looking for patterns, weak points, any small chance of escape. Liam focused on endurance, trying to shield himself from panic and keep his mind alert. Yet each day brought a new escalation of punishment. The cartel's methods were not impulsive, they were systematic, designed to instill terror and obedience. The twins, who had survived rival gangs, police investigations, and international deals, now faced an enemy whose rules they could not bend, whose power was absolute. The torture cell became a grim reality that redefined every memory of their past life. The luxury, the money, the parties, all of it was gone. replaced by the raw struggle for survival. Ryan and Liam had underestimated the stakes of the world they had entered. In Dubai, ambition had collided with merciless power, leaving the once dominant brothers trapped in a nightmare from which there was no clear escape. Every day in the cell was a reminder that in the shadows of crime, one misstep could erase not just wealth and status, but life itself. Weeks passed in the darkness of the torture cell, and the Cullen brothers' world had shrunk to the size of a single room. Time lost all meaning, nights blurred into days, and days stretched endlessly. Their bodies were battered and weak, their minds constantly alert to the next threat. Every sound, every movement outside the cell became a source of fear, a reminder that the cartel held complete control. The twins, who had once ruled a 300,000-pound empire with confidence and cunning, were now reduced to shadows of themselves, trapped in a place where wealth, skill, and reputation meant nothing. Outside Dubai, whispers of the Cullen brothers' disappearance began to circulate. Former associates in Manchester speculated on their fate, some imagining arrest, others fearing a darker end. The media, hungry for scandal, ran stories about missing drug dealers, unaware of the horror unfolding far from the UK. Even in their absence, the twins' story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly power could turn into vulnerability when ambition collided with danger. Inside the cell, survival became the only priority. Ryan and Liam had no access to money, no allies, and no way to communicate with the outside world. The cartel monitored every breath, every gesture, every attempt at resistance. Any hint of defiance was met with immediate retribution. The twins' pride, once their greatest strength, now became a liability. They were forced to confront the reality that the world they had built, the empire in Manchester, the new ventures in Dubai, had been nothing more than illusions. Their freedom had been a fleeting reward, their wealth a trap that had led them straight into the hands of a far more dangerous system. Rumors about the brothers' fate became more dire. Some claimed that the cartel executed them in the desert, leaving no trace behind. Others suggested that they were sold to rival criminal organizations as a warning to anyone daring to betray their network. In Dubai, the twins' names were whispered in fear, their story serving as an unspoken rule: deception, no matter how clever, carried consequences that could not be escaped. The luxury and glamour that had once surrounded them had evaporated, replaced by a chilling emptiness and the constant reminder of mortality. Back in Manchester, those who had once envied the Cullen brothers' wealth and influence felt a mix of relief and unease. The streets they had dominated returned to a fragile equilibrium, but the tale of the twins' rise and catastrophic fall lingered like a warning. For friends, family, and former rivals, it was proof that even the cleverest operators could be ensnared by forces beyond their control. The empire, once so carefully built, had vanished overnight. The story of Ryan and Liam Cullen ended not with a courtroom battle nor a dramatic escape, but in silence. No bodies were found, no final act recorded. Their lives, their power, and their wealth were erased, leaving only a legend of ambition, recklessness, and the harsh consequences of betrayal. The Cullen brothers had reached the heights of criminal success, only to be swallowed by the very world they had sought to conquer. In the end, their empire was gone, their names became a warning, and the shadows of Dubai claimed what Manchester had once celebrated.